Today is the 1st of March, the first day of our victorious sprint. Ukraine Media Center, Ukraine Force continues its operation. My name is Vasil Samakvalov, and our guest today is Olga Trofimtseva, Ambassador at Large with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, coordinator of the Exporters and Inventors Council, and we'll talk about the operation of Grain Corridor and situation with the food security in Ukraine. So first question is about our grain corridor. What's its condition? What are the prospects for continuation of its operation? And the main question, to what extent does it solve the problems of our agrarian sector today, which is in fact suffocating due to the impossibility to export in the amounts that it would like to export in. Good afternoon. Yes, thank you. I will start with the last part of your question probably. So, talking about the contribution of grain corridor and export through the seaports to the functioning of agrarian export and the operation of our agro-industrial complex in general. So it's difficult to overestimate it, because without the existence of grain corridor we would feel it way more difficult, because even the figures they say for themselves. The latest information that I have, that within the January 2023 we exported 4.8 million tons of grains, including, if we check the breakdown, 2.7 million were exported through the seaports, and the rest was exported by land through the countries of the European Union. That's why we really need this grain corridor, and we emphasized it from the very beginning that the grain corridor is needed for us first of all, and it's needed by the world market, because looking at the latest figures upon the results of the operation of the grain corridor, the three main buyers of our grains and oils through seaports, first of all, they are Spain, because Spain is the seagate of the European Union, from where it goes further on. Then it's China, and then Turkey. Also, a lot of wheat was supplied under the program Grain from Ukraine, initiated by the President Zelensky, which enabled us to get additional share. And thanks to the contribution of our partners, we know that now 43 countries are members of this Grain from Ukraine program, and thanks to the funding we were able to procure wheat from our farmers and send to the countries which require it most, that require those grain crops to provide their population to protect their population from famine. And talking about that, we supplied more than 22 tons of the grain products and above 18 tons of oil cultures. We would be able to export way more if all of our export ways operate in a proper way. What we see now is the typical situation. The time of extension of the grain corridor is coming closer, and Ukraine insists on extension of its operation for at least 1 year to enable our agrarians to have some stability in their work, at least because planning of their work is complicated. We're entering the spring sowing campaign. It's not easier than it was previous year, and our farmers need at least some confidence, some stability in this sense. And we will be also communicating it to our partners. We will discuss inclusion of the port of Mykolaiv into operation of the grain corridor. What will it mean for the port? It will mean the launch of its operation for export, which does not exist, something that does not exist now. It's the increase of number of vessels, of big vessels of large capacity, which would be able to enter the port of Mykolaiv. And we know that our big agrarian manufacturers such as Nibelon, they exported traditionally a lot of grain crops, and it will be extremely important to them, not only for Nibelon but also for the partners that they cooperate with, those the small and medium-sized farms that they procure their products from. And the extension of the operation of the grain corridor is important to us because we see again this typical situation, the increase of pressure and blackmailing by the terrorist state, which was happening back in November, and it's nothing new today. I think that all of us present here and the spectators, they've seen the information about the work of Russian inspectors who don't work quite effectively and actively as a part of those inspection groups and inspection teams. And Russia starts sending the signals that the operation of this grain corridor is not quite feasible in this format because our agriculture products are not being sold as we would like them to be sold. So those are the narratives that are being reinforced now in the world press, in the world media. We see it, and we work on the countermeasures to their attempts of Russia to deteriorate the operation of the grain corridor. So then that's why we will hope, we already submitted the application, we already addressed United Nations and Turkey first of all, that there should be no sabotage on part of Russia, and we don't have to succumb to their blackmailing, because we've seen back in November when such blackmailing was on, that we will withdraw from the grain corridor. And in our opinion, our reaction should be harsh, as well as the reaction of our partners, because everybody understands that any difficulties in the operation of the grain corridor complicates the situation in the world markets right away, because any signals from Russia, they influence the instability, they contributed to instability in the world markets. And we can hear the narrative that the prices decreased. Well, everybody sees it, but we keep on living. But first of all, the prices decreased, but they're still at the world level, and they are very volatile, and it's a huge problem for the market, and it's a huge problem for international organizations such as WFP, who procures the grain from Ukraine and supplies the grain to the poorest countries of the world, and they are dependent on that export, the export via the seaways, and they're interested in its proper operation. So the sea corridor works, but it's still works as the reserve. So what's the percentage of Ukrainian comparing to the total Ukrainian capabilities, and whether the sea transportation will grow? Is there, in this view, is there a need to develop the land logistics ways? So now we achieve the indicator of 60-65% of the capacity that used to exist before the war, and it's both in terms of seaway and land mainways. But we see that transportation by land through the borders of European Union, through the countries of European Union. They are also an important way of export for us, not only in terms of the diversification of the export risks, but also from the point of view from strategic long-term perspective, because we are officially the candidate for membership in the European Union, and on official and unofficial level, I personally and many of our colleagues, we try to communicate it to our European friends and partners that so-called solidarity ways implemented for Ukraine, the regime of maximum assistance not only for Ukrainian grain but to all agricultural products exported to European Union, those solidarity ways, they are not, or we should not see them as any humanitarian aid or any humanitarian project, and many people in European Union have understanding, and there is understanding by Ukrainian government, that those solidarity lanes or the solidarity corridors are just the beginning of the project of construction of logistics ways between Ukraine and European Union, in a view of the fact that Ukraine soon, maybe not within 2 years, but in the medium-term perspective, will become a member of European Union. And we've heard this statement already, and it's my pleasure that the representatives of European Commission, they say that de facto Ukraine is already integrated into economic system of European Union. We started feeling it from the beginning of the full-scale aggression. The deficit was reflected on prices in the European market when Ukraine started feeling complications with its export. Now we have to make it de jure, so that Ukrainian export with the least obstacles possible and with the regime of maximum existence, Ukrainian export products reach European countries. So we have to develop those ways, and you see that now there are active discussions and a lot of criticizing that the customs posts don't work in quite an optimal way, and there are still long queues in the railway crossings, and there are still complications with the cargo transport, and all those problems should be solved. We should initiate sanitary inspections with Poland, as it was happening when Poland was joining the European Union. So we should assist to the most effective export by our agrarians for all the products that they are still capable of manufacturing and export in compliance with the highest standards. How all of those changes influence the structure of our exports. What markets did we lose? What are the new markets we acquired? And what are the forecasts? So the three main buyers of our grains and oils, I already mentioned them, but the main changes is that European Union became the leader on the list of our partners. It's quite logical, I guess, in view of all those changes, because reorienting of the export flows resulted in this, and not only agricultural products but other products of our export are being exported to the countries of European Union. And it's important to check the statistics now, because now we can see that our biggest trade partner now is Poland, but we understand, and the second biggest is Romania, but it's exclusively because they are transit countries, they are closest to us, and it does not necessarily mean that all of our products remain there. It moves to the third countries such as France, Germany or Spain or any other countries or European Union, and not only European Union, by the way. We export our products through the ports of Romania by the sea, so it's one of the most interesting moments in reorientation of Ukrainian external trade. Also, you were able to see the figures. You were able to see that the fraction of agricultural products also increased in our export. And on one hand, me as a representative of agrarian sector, I may be happy about that, but on the other hand, I understand that there's not much to be happy about because it resulted from the terrible situation in other sectors of economy due to Russian aggression, Russian war against Ukraine. So last question from myself, the stance of Turkey, who is the main guarantor of the compliance with the grain agreements. How volatile or stable is this? How the situation with an earthquake influenced the situation with the Turkey? Does Turkey still keep focus on these grain corridors thing? Yes, our contacts with our Turkish colleagues from the grain processing sector and representatives of the authorities of Turkey, it says that they maintain their stable stance, they don't change it, and they are the main guarantors in this sense in terms of operation of the grain corridor, because as it was back in November, you remember the pressure of Russia was countered by Turkey. There was blackmailing, but I think the situation with an earthquake and the complicated humanitarian situation in Turkey, well, let's not forget that today many grain processing businesses in Turkey ended up in the area which was affected by the earthquake, and the situation is quite complicated. So that's why Turkey will require, and it keeps requiring, Ukrainian export of grain and maybe Ukrainian flour, not only grain for processing but already ready-made flour. And so their stance is unchanged, and we appreciate it, and we appreciate the fact that they support and reinforce us in the operation of grain corridors. Let's proceed to the questions from the floor. Anastasia Kravchenko, Ukrinform. My question is regarding the future extension of the grain deal. In your opinion, is it real that our partners will agree to the requests of Ukraine and include the port of Mykolaiv eventually, because it was talked about before the first extension, but the things remained as they were? Well, you know, just like then, even now we have very clear stance in this regard. Our best export managers and grain traders are the armed forces of Ukraine, and the last time the situation with Mykolaiv was not quite sure in terms of security, because we understand, we see a lot of information about the price of insurance for those vessels which enter now and which are currently located in the ports of the Black Sea. It's quite a painful issue which influences the price for farmers inside Ukraine. And as to the port of Mykolaiv, before the Munich Security Conference, we had an interesting meeting related to this, and representatives of Ukraine, all the representatives of the parliament and me, we all said that the long-range weapons and the fighters for Ukraine will solve the issue of operation of the grain corridor to its full capacity. Is the best case scenario. We can consider a number of them. For us, the best case scenario is the extension for 1 year and inclusion of Mykolaiv, and the worst case scenario will be the refusal by Russia to communicate and to cooperate and to continue everything. But I think that we will be able to deal with such blackmailing, and between those worst case scenario and best case scenario, there is also a number of scenarios in between that we will be able to identify our way according to, you know, that the lines are still long. More than 100 vessels wait for entrance to the ports of Big Odessa to be loaded with grain. So we not only want to extend it, but we want to operate it properly, and so there is no sabotage on part of Russian inspectors. Oleg Boychun, transnational corporations increase pressure on us with regard to the hardening of our migration legislation to add the flow from Asia to us. Don't you think that in this context the technologies 4.0 will allow us to leave this situation? So will the government and Ministry of Foreign Affairs take any adequate decisions as to the new technologies? Oh, thank you very much. It's quite an interesting question. It's worth at least 2 hours of discussion. Well, the issue of the workforce was critical in agro-industrial complex even before the war, because a lot of those who were employed there left for the armed forces. They are now in the ranks of the armed forces, and after the war this question will remain very sharp. The technologies will never replace humans, let's be honest. Even now Ukrainian agricultural sector, not only in my opinion but in the opinion of many of our colleagues from the European Union, Ukraine is one of the leaders in application of new technologies, starting from the drones, but it does not necessarily cancel the fact that we have to work on the issue of involvement of the qualified professionals in the agrarian sector, and there are initiatives now with the government which are related to overlapping of these two areas, these two sectors. I mean, human capital and technologies, how to make it in a way that our agro-industrial complex now is oriented on the climatic to become climatic adaptable but human-centric. So getting back from robotization of our agrarian sector, last question. The fact that we don't have the capacity to, or we don't have opportunity to export to the full capacity, that will pose the question of creating the processing capacities here, but now we don't have investment resource. And to what extent can we change the structure of our internal market and the structure of our export? You know, the structure is already changing, and it started changing even before the war, and I call my colleagues usually not to resort to the discussions about why do we export grain and don't export ready-made products like pasta, for example. I think that macroeconomists may explain it quite well, and I try to explain it too, because the grain market is huge in terms of scale and money made there, and the market for pasta is way smaller, and conquering your spot there is not such an easy task as we would like to imagine. It does not only require investments and not only construction of some processing capacities, but it also requires the work on whole logistic chain, and you have to start thinking from the end of the chain, like who is going to be the final buyer. Like my colleague just mentioned, the demographic problem, and it will not be renewed right away after the war, and we will have to sell our processed food somewhere. We see that there are changes in their operation now. Some of them are now transitioning to other types of crops, so they don't depend on single crops like corn, because in the best case they make zero money on that, and they work for minus profit. But I think that this process will evolve, and let's not forget it will be happening in parallel with our Euro integration steps, and I have very high expectations for Ukrainian agro-industrial complex to become an integral part of European agro-industrial complex, and our processing capacities which will be built, they will be built in those chains of the countries of European Union, and not only European Union, because there is a lot of markets for our products, but to have our products comply with the requirements of those markets, to have our products certified so that our manufacturers understand how to sell it. It requires a lot of work on part of Ministry of Foreign Affairs, our manufacturers, and so on and so forth. Thank you very much. Joining us was Olga Trofimtseva, Ambassador at Large with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, Coordinator of the Exporters and Investors Council. See you tomorrow.